You ready?
Okay. All right, well, good morning, everybody. I think we've got most of the board members seated. If everybody will just take their seats, we'll go ahead and get started. All right, Ms. Kinchin, if you'll please call the roll.
Chairman Klein.
Here.
Mr. Lovell. Here. Mr. Landry.
Here.
Mr. Myers.
Here.
Secretary Brown. Mr. Whitty.
Here.
Mr. Bro.
Here.
Ms. Goodson.
Here.
Mr. Broussard. Mr. Wyatt. Mr. Ince. Mr. Callie.
Here.
Ms. Salines Gorman.
Here.
Mr. Bubrick. Mr. Bourgeois.
Here.
Mr. Hidalgo. Ms. Cormier.
Here.
Mr. Segrera. President McGinnis.
Here.
Representative Zerain. Senator Henskins.
I believe he's coming. I don't know. He said he was on his way.
You have a quorum.
Okay. Thank you, Inger. All right, members, if you could please take a look at your agenda. I'd ask for a motion to move agenda item number 8 up to agenda item number 5. We have got some major announcements this morning related to the IIJA and the emergency supplemental legislation that was passed by Congress. And so we've got some things to discuss there on which projects are going to receive funding. So I've got a motion by Ms. Cormier, a second by Ms. Goodson to move agenda item number 8 up to 5. Any public comment? Any objection to the motion? Motion carries. Okay. Approval of the minutes. Inger sent those around. I've got a motion by Mr. Lovell, a second by Ms. Cormier. Any public comment? Any objection to the motion? Motion carries. Any old business or announcements for the board? All right. So agenda item number 5, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So members, we had envisioned that Neil McMillan would give you an update on the discussions that were taking place in Congress and the administration on the IIJA priorities, as well as the priorities included in the emergency supplemental, and to give you an update on how those conversations were going and the various funding programs or initiatives that were called for in those pieces of legislation. However, this morning, the administration announced its priorities on both IIJA and the emergency supplemental for Hurricane Ida. And so these are some big-time investments in coastal projects. $214 million for the Atchafalaya Basin, which includes dredging operations, repairs to levees, bank line stabilization, floodgate construction, various activities within the Atchafalaya Basin, which, as you know, the governor stood up a task force at the beginning of his second term that looked at the overall priorities and sustainability of the Atchafalaya Basin. So we have a plan that we're going to be submitting to the legislature that calls for all of those concepts, those projects, those initiatives, and to have $214 million that are going to fund those activities is a big deal for the coastal program. $378 million for Morganza to the Gulf. So as many of you know, the state and locals have largely funded Morganza to the Gulf up to this point. Neil, can you go ahead and come up to the table, please? 2 years ago, I believe we received around $12 million. Last year, we got $19 million. $378 million included in IIJA for Morganza to the Gulf. $125 million for Southwest Coastal. A huge authorization that has been on the books for several years. It has received very little federal funding to the tune of probably $200,000 to $300,000 from initial work on identifying structures to be elevated, but $125 million for Southwest Coastal for Cameron, Calcasieu, and Vermilion parishes. $783 million for New Orleans to Venice in Plaquemines Parish for 4 segments of levees that need to be completed, and also raising additional levees within that hurricane protection system, which has been tested several times in the last several years throughout hurricane season. Upper Barataria, $8 million. Portions of St. Charles and Upper Lafourche, so some initial work there. We're working towards a chief's report there, but once we get a chief's report signed over the next few months, it'll be great to have some federal money included in there. $3 million for a Tangibaho study, which is going to be a priority area for the CPRA, looking at other areas within the coastal area, not just the coastal zone, and that includes Tangibaho Parish. West Shore Link Pontchartrain, $450 million. Addition on that is on top of the $760 million that was approved in the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018. Grand Isle, there is going to be a study that looks at what projects need to be moved forward by the federal government to ensure the overall sustainability of Grand Isle. So $3 million for that investigation. It's somewhat disappointing knowing that segmented breakwaters perform quite nicely. Some other concepts that we think we've identified at CPRA to address the issues on Grand Isle, but we're going to go through that study with the federal government in the Corps and hopefully come up with some more resilient measures for the town of Grand Isle and the island itself. If there's one area, members, that was left out of the emergency supplemental, which is of great disappointment, is Lafitte. There is nothing in IIJA or the emergency supplemental for Lafitte. And so there is close to $30 million that CPRA is going to be allocating to Lafitte this fiscal year, which you're going to hear about here shortly in the annual plan. But that is of great disappointment that Lafitte was left out. And so we've got a lot of work to do there. When we're talking about $783 million for NOV, $378 for Morganza, $125 for Southwest Coastal, $214 for the Atchafalaya Basin, $450 for West Shore Link Pontchartrain. Those are some big-time investments for protection and some restoration concepts as well. There's also dollars that have been identified, and I know I'm completely stealing your presentation here, Neil, so sorry.
You must have been staffed pretty well.
I was, thank you. There is some significant funding for the Mississippi River, for some levees, for the dredging of South Pass, Southwest Pass, and some damages and repairs that need to be addressed as a result of Hurricane Ida. Some jetties, some additional jetty work that need to be done in South Pass and Southwest Pass. So all of this is just hot off the press. We're going to be spending the rest of the afternoon trying to get our head around exactly what this means. So we've got an annual plan that we thought was pretty much finalized. This is in draft form. As you know, we have to go through a public comment period. But so we're going to be looking at which buckets of funding these dollars are allocated to. Is there a cost share associated with this? It's our understanding that any projects that are included in IIJA, there's a 65-35% cost share. If it's included in the emergency supplemental, a lot of those projects are 100% federal. So that is good news. NOV looks to be in the emergency supplemental. West Shore Lake Pontchartrain looks to be in the emergency supplemental, as well as a large portion of the Atchafalaya Basin. Mr. McMillan, do you have anything to add? And you may, Neil has been following this very closely in conversations with our congressional delegation and Biden administration officials. We're going to be going up to D.C. next week for Washington Mardi Gras, but we've got several meetings planned with the Assistant Secretary of the Army, OMB, to try to really dive into these details. So, Neil, if you have anything to add or anything that I may have left out or you want to provide more details on, please do so.
Sure, I'd be happy to go through a few slides and put in context, I guess, how we did compared to what was available nationally, and then also look at some additional funding opportunities that we're targeting, and we'll see if we can kind of grow the benefit for the Louisiana coast through this opportunity. So this covers what we call the IIJA, but you probably heard it as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill. It's a $1.2 trillion bill representing $550 billion in new spending over baseline. That's going to be spread out over 5 years. So some funding is rolled out much sooner, some is going to be stretched out in the next 5 years. This is on top of our annual appropriations process. And when it comes to coastal, most projects are not mandatory, so they're kind of discretionary at the agency level, and they'll either do so through work plans like the Army Corps just did, or through grant competitions. Agencies like NOAA will do. So we'll have to identify priorities, share those, as well as submit worthy projects. We had some major congressional support that we want to mention for the IIJA. Senator Bill Cassidy was a key negotiator in the bipartisan group that kept this going, even when it was thought to be dead many times on the Hill. And he was the Republican lead for the working groups on resiliency in ports and waterways. And obviously we can see that has a direct tie-in to our state and our coast. And Congressman Troy Carter also strongly supported this through the House, which was fantastic. So these are some top-line numbers to agencies that we're following. Army Corps, FEMA, NOAA have a lot of direct application to us, but then Department of Interior and EPA also have some programs that are somewhat relevant to us. And so these are the top line, but obviously they're divided up into many different categories, and I'll go through kind of our target spots there. But as Chip was announcing, the Army Corps announced this morning where their IIJA was. This comes out of a $17.1 billion pot split up between resilience was a big faction of this, but also a lot was ports and waterways management. And there was $2.55 billion in construction for coastal storm risk management that we looked at, as well as $1.9 for aquatic ecosystem restoration, and also $808 million for MR&T. And so that's the context that we got. $52.9 million for Atchafalaya, $378.5 for Morgans of the Gulf, $125 for Southwest Coastal, and obviously other projects, but those are the big highlight ones for the IIJA. And as Chip mentioned, these are cost share dollars, so we will have to bring the support, but still pretty significant. And FEMA also got a lot of funding. A lot of their funding is focused on, I guess, pre-disaster response. Of note, this is really historic funding for the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program. A lot of that does the non-structural work that communities like Louisiana can take advantage of. And then there's kind of some newer programs, the BRIC, which has been a challenge for the state, but we're working on that. And then this Storm Act, which is a revolving loan fund. That's just another way communities can buy in. This is the first time that's been funded, so we'll have to track that and see how we can take advantage. NOAA got a good bit of funding too. These are really high numbers for these accounts. Some is done in partnership with NIFWIF, which we feel comfortable. We have a long-standing partnership, and then other ones we'll work with either our other state agency partners or communities to kind of develop projects. A lot of what we think we can do here is in the $3 to $5 million project range. So it's either growing existing projects or knocking out kind of targeted ones of those size. This one, Department of Interior and Forest Service, it's definitely the authors were viewing this for western wildfires, but there are some eligibilities that we obviously want to check into and see. We do a lot of voluntary ecosystem restoration. we have water quality and fish passage issues. Can we participate and take advantage of this program as well? And then EPA got some money focused on regional waters, Lake Pontchartrain, Gulf of Mexico. They got significant amounts. Estuaries got some funding, and hypoxia, which is this is kind of the first funding that's gone to that task force mission set. So we'll see what that comes of that. And then lastly, I want to mention the non-funding aspects of this bill that's really helpful, which is the permitting improvements. The transportation section codified one federal decision, which is supposed to have a 2-year goal, one document. That should make, if that becomes a habit for the government, that can be advantageous for us as we do extra projects. But also it permanently authorized the Federal Permitting Improvement Steering Council. FIPSI is what it's called. And we're actually pretty familiar with them, as Mid-Barataria and Mid-Breton are on their dashboard projects. So that's a good way to convene agencies and keep major complex projects on track. So it's good that we're not losing that ability. And hopefully as that agency is solidified, it'll get smoother and smoother as we work through it. So that's what I'd like to add, and thanks for letting me go.
Yep. Thank you, Neil. And I appreciate your good work at the federal level on tracking all of these things. So there are other opportunities for us to get additional dollars as a result of IIJA and emergency supplemental. Let's see, Ms. Cormier for a question.
I'm not exactly sure if this question's for Neil. Thank you for your presentation, or anybody else in the room who may know, but I understand the top numbers to key agencies, several of them, 3 or 4 of them are on the task force for CPRA. Do you see any increased funding in CPRA in the future because of these historic numbers? I'm just wondering if we can build more projects here with 3 of the, I think, 5 agencies represented with their historic funding.
Great, thank you for the question. The infrastructure bill also reauthorized the Sport Fish and Boating Trust Fund, and I think one of the other Wallet Bro provisions that funds CPRA. So that's been that's consistent for 5 more years, and I think it got it's tax based, so that's kind of revenue dependent. But the funding secure. I don't know that there's any extra dedicated to CPRA.
So reauthorized, but we'll dive into it to see if there's any additional opportunities there. It doesn't look like it at first glance, but it is important that CPRA continues to be reauthorized. As you know, Lori's a very favorable cost share for the state for that program. But Neil, if you'll just take that back, and we'll dive into that as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, Mr. Bourgeois.
Yeah, not so much a question, but a comment. I mean, this is an astronomical amount of money that came into the coast of Louisiana. And thank you to CPRA, because we don't get this without all of the work of CPRA, the governor pushing on this. So, we always look at our individual pots of money and we see it compared to what we got to get done. But the good news in looking at this is the rest of the money didn't go very far. It was hanging out in South Louisiana, and that's a very important part. I just wanted to add that to the comments.
Yep. As you know, Dwayne, yesterday we signed the PPA for Morganza, which governs how funds will be spent, crediting provisions in the whole 9 yards, and then to be followed today by $378 million. I think it's been Morganza's off to a pretty good start this week. So thank you for that, Dwayne, and your good work at North Lafourche. Miss Gorman, Salines Gorman.
Oh,
Where are you?
Gorman's good.
Gorman?
I'm right
Salines?
here.
Gorman?
Yeah, I'm Gorman.
Monica.
I'm good. Thanks. I am dancing in my seat. I am so excited. I don't even know. I mean, on behalf of so many of us, Chip, Dwayne's right. CPRA has worked so hard. The governor's worked so hard. All of us have. I'm extremely, extremely excited, but I am sincerely grateful on behalf of all of our communities. Yes, West Shore received the additional $450 million. I know there were a lot of people in the river parishes who were very concerned when we sort of looked at kind of reeling in the cost and things like that. But this additional $450 $450 million is just going to be really well received by these river parishes, but on behalf of all of the communities, truly, truly bring back to Congressman Cassidy and Carter, all of them, that for the people of Louisiana, this is just huge. I have been dancing in my seat all morning. I danced on the way here when I parked. I was dancing last night when Congressman Graves called me. So I don't even know how to contain my excitement because this is such a big win for Louisiana. So thanks very much for this report.
Yep. Thank you, Monica. And as you know, I believe the board was briefed at our last meeting of a situation we were having with a landowner.
Yes.
Which had stalled West Shore really in its track, but we got that resolved, and we are full steam ahead on moving to construction for that protection project for the river parishes. So that is great news.
The double whammy.
Yep.
Yes, we got 2 wins.
Ms. Cormier, you have another question?
I do. It's just really a comment. Again, you know, I've been on this board for a little while, and when we did some of the prior master plans and annual plans, we really had no money. We just had a plan. And to see this day, I'd be remiss to say Miss Gorman and I danced in the parking lot on the way in because it was a happy day, and I'd be remiss if I didn't thank you guys for all your hard work, all the governors involved, Republicans, Democrats, in this day and age. In our past, we've had Republican governors. We have had Democratic governors. Governor John Bell has done a great job and been a voice representing our state, and Congressman Cassidy, Senator Cassidy and Congressman Carter and all the people that pushed this forward. We could not be more grateful as the state and coastal Louisiana. I'm happy for all of my counterparts on this board that are getting to do projects that we envisioned as being good projects for the future, but never dreamed we'd have the money. So grateful and thankful like Ms. Garman.
Yep, well said, Lord. Thank you. All right, Neil. Well, we will, as I said, we'll be going to D.C. next week. And so, Neil, let's plan on coming back to the board with an update on timing of these dollars. I'm sure that there's going to be guidance that rolls out from the Corps on how these dollars will flow. Overall eligibility criteria will be promulgated. So we'll be tracking all of that. So thank you, Neil. All right, so let's go back up to the CPRA implementation update. We're going to be, which will be given by Mr. Grandy. Mr. Haas is out in quarantine, but he is, I know he's tuning in. So hello, Mr. Haas.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Greg Grandy. I'm the Deputy Director at CPRA. And Bren Hawes, our Executive Director, asked me to pass along his regrets. He would much rather be here in person than at home, but he is with us in spirit and watching along. And I'm sure if I say something wrong, my phone's going to buzz right here. So either I'm having a heart attack or he's sending me a message, one of the two. I'll try to move through the implementation relatively quickly because we've got a long agenda and spend a little bit more time on the draft annual plan. We currently have 95 active projects. That includes 33 projects in construction, 54 in engineering and design, and 8 in planning. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of these as we move through. The chart gives you a breakdown of those projects. The first project that I'll go into in detail over in Southwest Louisiana, the Cameron Meadows Marsh Creation and Terracing project. This is a CPRA project, and dredging is going on as we speak. We anticipate constructing 300 acres of marsh and 11 acres of terraces. I'll move through this. So you can see the funding. Our federal partner on this project is NOAA. It's a CPRA project. Construction budget of approximately $32 million. The borrow area is offshore in the Gulf of Mexico. it's about 7 miles from the project site. It includes both terracing. You can see the containment where the marsh creation is, where pumping is going on today. You can see some of the pumping right there, the dredge connected, filling the area up. It looks like a large area of chocolate milk today as it dewaters and gets down into the elevation range. We anticipate this vegetating up nicely, probably towards the back half of this year. And this project, it's another great partnership between state and federal agencies, including NOAA, all of our Cpri partners, and CPRA. Aside from the government agencies, which you can see the logos at the top, you can see a number of Louisiana connections. Lonnie Harper, engineers, the folks with geoengineers. Great Lakes Dock and Dredge is doing the construction on this project. We anticipate this is going to take another couple of months. As we look forward in the annual plan, you won't see this project carried forward because the construction funds will be complete. It will be moving into the monitoring and operation and maintenance phase of construction. The next project that we'll take a look at is the Golden Triangle Marsh Creation Project. This project is in Orleans and St. Bernard Parish. This is a project, the funding for the engineering design came from the Restore Act, Bucket 2. The funding for construction came from NERDA, the Louisiana Trustee Implementation Group that funded construction. You can see the sort of purplish areas where the marsh creation is going on. Lake Bourne just to the right, the IHNC surge barrier, intercoastal waterway, and the Mr. Go to the south of the project area. Some video of the project. You can see containment being built. The dredge we anticipate showing up in about 3 to 4 weeks, and then dredging on this we anticipate being completed kind of first half of this year if everything goes to schedule. You can see Lake Bourne in the background. This is one of the 3 polygons of marsh creation that'll take place in there. Kind of slow, laborious process, clamshell, dredging up in situ material, building that containment along the shoreline. They may have to come back a couple of times as they're doing this to get to the right elevation to support the dredge material that'll be coming in from Lake Bourne. This slide shows the folks working on this project, estimated 124 contracted jobs, and that doesn't include the work of the folks at CPRA who are working on the project or are participating governmental partners at USDA, NOAA, EPA, the Interior Department, or Restore, as well as the folks on the NERDA TIG. You can see logos from some of the folks, the companies that are working on this, Louisiana companies, Louisiana Connections, the folks from Great Lakes Dock and Dredge, again, are doing construction on this project, and we anticipate this project will fare relatively good. I know there's some folks in the crowd that talk about restoration, the restoration projects protecting the protection. Well, this is one of those projects, Simone, where the restoration protects the protection really specifically. And the last project that we'll take a look, and you've received some updates on this, is the Spanish Pass Marsh Creation Project down just south of Venice. You can see on the slide the magenta areas. By volume, this is the largest project that has ever been bid by CPRA. Approximately $100 million project is being funded through NERDA and the Louisiana Trustee Implementation Group. To date, we've dredged about 3.5 million cubic yards from the river. We've built about a mile and refurbished some additional marsh and ridge. The contractor, Weeks Marine, is working around the clock, day and night. And by September of this year, we estimate we'll have dredged up to 16 million cubic yards and completed the extension of new land 7 miles westward from Venice. So you can see we're looking from sort of the south of the Gulf towards the river. You can see that higher area with a ridge where some of the equipment is, and lower areas to the right where the marsh is. The borrow area for this is in the Mississippi River. The pipe is on the east bank of the river, just south of Venice, just south of the jump. The pipe, I was fortunate to be out there in the summer of last year when they pulled the pipe across the river. They actually had to shut the river down to navigation for, it was about a period of 4 hours, and then the river opened back up. They coordinated very closely with the Corps, with the Coast Guard, with navigation interests, and were able to get that pipeline moved in a pretty quick period of time, very safely as well. As we move to the next slide, this project, 180 non-governmental jobs were created, and you can see the logos of some of the Louisiana companies involved in this project. The lead engineer on this was Baird. Royal provided support, OSI, Geoengineers, Duplantis Design Group, Weeks Marine is the contractor for that particular project. If there aren't any questions, Mr. Chairman, I'll be glad to stop the presentation here and pause and see if there are any questions from the board.
I don't have a question, Greg. Just a comment that one of the projects that we recently announced started construction that I don't see in the implementation update is the Lake Bourne Marsh Creation Project. It's about 2,700 acres of marsh that will be created with, again, dredging material from the lake, about 2,700 acres, largest marsh creation project based upon acreage that we will have constructed to date. I know that's in President McGinnis's area. I just want to highlight that project as well. I'm assuming we'll have some video footage for that from that project on a future presentation.
We will have that on a future presentation, and I'll just note there's a lot of dredging that's taking place across Louisiana, from Cameron Parish, the Cameron Meadows projects. In Terrebonne Parish, we've got the Bayou Decad project. Barrier Island work, we finished the increment of the Terrebonne Barrier Island Restoration Project on Trinity Island. We're doing work on Chandelier and West Bell right now. The Caminada Headlands Back Barrier Marsh, that is moving through construction. We anticipate a dredge will be appearing to work on that project soon, so that's in Lafourche Parish. You go across from Grand Isle, West Grand Terre, dredges working on the West Grand Terre Island project. You move over into Plaquemines Parish, you've got Spanish Pass. A little bit further up, NOAA is under contract to do a large-scale marsh restoration in the Barataria Basin. You move across into the Breton, and you've got the Lake Bourne project that you mentioned, the Golden Triangle project, and then Orleans Parish, you've got the Cpri New Orleans land shoreline stabilization marsh creation project. So I know we've talked about before and jokingly called it the year of the dredge. We are in the middle of the year of the dredge, and dredge work going on, land building, marsh creation, ridge restoration, barrier island, dune, beach, and marsh habitat across the coast. And just a tremendous amount of work. And within the challenge of a COVID environment, the challenges with the hurricanes we've had the last few years, we're just pleased as punch to be where we are with the program today.
Pleased as punch, huh?
Yes, sir.
Well, tell the dredging industry to get ready, because based upon the forecast of what's included in the annual plan and what's included in the emergency sup and IIJA, it's going to be that activity is going to continue. So why don't we go ahead and tee up the annual plan presentation. Ms. Cormier, you have a comment or question?
I just want to know if do we have every dredge in the country working in Louisiana right now?
Not every dredge in the country. We do have a lot of dredges, and we have, this is something we've been working on and recognizing that the surge with work is going to be coming for several years. So we've been working with industry, going to the WIDA, the Dredge Association meeting, forecasting this, meeting with companies that are Louisiana-based companies that are dredging companies that have never done work for CPRA, to ask them, why haven't you done? Are there some barriers? And we've had more bids on our recent projects that we have had in the past, and we think that's a result of that outreach. We have some companies that have done core dredging projects but have never done CPRA projects that are under contract to do work on the Lake Bourne project and the New Orleans Land Bridge project.
Well, I just commend you guys, because I remember there was a time where we would get one bid on a project or not favorable bids, very high estimate. And so I commend you guys for seeing a problem, finding a solution, and working through it. And also, I think you brought up a great point. You guys worked the entire time through COVID. All these projects that were completed through COVID and hurricanes and pauses and stops because of the hurricanes. What you guys have done is a national story that should be told, and somebody's got a book deal here somewhere. Really talking about resilience for the state of Louisiana, this agency has done great, amazing things. So thank you very much. And Bren, if you're listening, that goes to you too.
And I'll pass credit along to three of my colleagues, Rudy Semino, Jerry Carroll, and Mr. Maury Chandelier, who's here in the audience today. A lot of that outreach work to the dredging industry, those guys took it on their shoulders and began to do that work. And then the understanding within the context of what we're doing, the Corps of Engineers continues to do the dredging that they do annually to keep our shipping channels open. They're doing a huge project on South Pass right now, about a 10 million cubic yard project where they're beneficially using all the material down near the mouth of the Delta, some on wildlife and fisheries property down in that neck of the woods. So it's something that we're grateful for, that it played out the way we were hoping it would play out.
I think too, Mr. Grandy, at one point, it may have been last year, and I'm sure the same applies this year, that of all the entire fleet of dredges in the Gulf of Mexico, over half of the fleet was working in coastal Louisiana. So maybe not throughout the entire country, but over half of the fleet of dredges in the Gulf of Mexico were working in South Louisiana. I think is an impressive statistic. Mr. Hidalgo?
Yes, sir. I think the dredging industry is supporting the future also, because there are several dredges under construction right now. I know there's several to be delivered in 2022 shortly. So, we're going to have more equipment available to us in the future.
See Mr. Marlbrew over there. I think there's some dredging activity that needs to be done on Bayou Lafourche. So, all right. Thank you, Mr. Grandy, for a great implementation update. Let's dive into the next agenda item, which is the annual plan. Members, I know we've made a lot of big announcements this morning already, but this year, this next fiscal year that starts July 1, it, in my opinion, without question, is the most important year, the biggest year that the CPRA, the State's Coastal Program, has had to date. As you know, we have been very close to hitting that $1 billion annual allocation and expenditures for work for both protection and restoration. And the annual plan that's going to be presented to the public here in short order and ultimately to the legislature is well over $1 billion. So as Lori was just saying, if you think back where this board was under Governor Blanco at the beginning of Jindal to where we are now, of $1.2 billion in expenditures, this is the moment in time we've been waiting for. So, Mr. Grandy, if you'll give the brief overview of the annual plan, please.
Absolutely. Chairman Klein, on behalf of the men and women that work at CPRA, I'm honored to be here today to present this draft annual plan. I've got a few comments that I'd like to spend on background before I get into it. This is the 13th annual plan that's been developed by CPRA since legislation was passed requiring CPRA to submit these plans to the legislature. This is the largest of all the plans. And if you think about this plan as a companion to the Coastal Master Plan, the Coastal Master Plan is a 50-year, $50 billion plan. So if you average that out, you would anticipate spending on a range of about $1 billion a year. So that's where we are, not just this year, but with our forecast for the next couple of years. In presenting this plan today, the public comment period is officially open. There are a few things that I'd like to say that's to make you aware of that depend on information that we don't have in this draft plan that we anticipate having for the final plan that will come back in March. Part of it we found out this morning, some information on the infrastructure bill. We found that out at 7 o'clock this morning is when we started to get some official numbers on. I'll just note that
Ms. Goodson said she's got the money for us.
That's what we were hoping. just a note, as we put these annual plans together, our staff, anyone who's responsible for a project or a program, starts working on their budgeting and their scheduling they start working in the summer of 2021. In the September-October time period, they're starting to upload their budget information into spreadsheets that form the basis of some of the annual plan that you see today. So it takes us a while to get to this point of work. And I'd like to recognize this gentleman next to me, Mr. Joe Weibel, who tremendous leadership throughout that whole process to our department. He doesn't do it alone. There's dozens and dozens of people in our accounting office, in our field offices are responsible for monitoring and operations and management of projects, and project managers and planners. Everyone involved with the project has a piece to this puzzle. So first of all, I want to say thank you to all of our staff at CPRA for the hard work that goes into it. But there's some things that are not in this plan that will be in the plan when we come back to you from a final standpoint. And Ms. Cormier, I know at the Chenier Plain meeting you talked about the CPRA program. Right now we have a placeholder in the budget for CPRA projects, but we don't have the name of those projects until the task force meets next week, so you won't see those on the maps that we present a little bit later. We're hoping there'll be a few more dots in Southwest Louisiana when we come back and Director Hawes presents to you in March, but you won't see those on the maps today because they haven't been approved. There are a few things that are in the plan that I'll note. We also got some information today. We did budget for the state's cost share on feasibility studies. We had anticipated that there would be 4 feasibility studies that would come through the infrastructure bill, and we included a cost share for what those feasibility studies that would be, one of which Chairman Klein talked about, the Tangipahoa feasibility study. So those are 3-year, $3 million efforts, so we budgeted what our cost share would be on that. We'll be looking at some more of that later this afternoon in between now and the final plan. I'll also note that the Southwest Louisiana, Southwest Coastal Project money that we had last year from the surplus that the legislature provided to CPRA, that will be part of the cost share that we'll use on that Southwest. We anticipate signing an MOU with the Corps of Engineers later this month, and that will start to pay some of our cost share, and we'll pay it down in advance of them having their funding available to us. So that said, I'll go ahead and jump into the annual plan. So what is it? This is a request for authorization to spend revenues if they're received, and it provides a 3-year outlook, so not just fiscal year 2023, but 24 and 25 as well. It includes the projected revenues and what the sources of those revenues are, and the expenditures, and those expenditures go down to the project level and they go down to the quarter, not just the yearly level, but the quarter. And we also describe the activity that'll take place with this. So why do we do it? Number one, it's part of the law. We do it because Act 523 and Act 570 require us to do it, and we're required to submit that to the legislature as part of our funding requests. But we also do it because it's part of being transparent with the public and with all of the stakeholders across the coastal area, and to signal what it is we anticipate working on, not just next year, but the next 3 years. So this is the budget total that we anticipate for fiscal year 2023. It's $1.28 billion, as I mentioned before. This is the largest amount of funding that CPRA has requested for an annual plan. If you'll see 81% of the funding is in that very large green piece of pie. That's how I cut my pie at Thanksgiving. It's in that large piece of pie for construction. If you add up construction, engineering, design, planning, along with operations, maintenance, and monitoring, that's 92% of our budget goes to project expenditures. That's pretty significant. I know that Director Hawes and Chairman Klein have continued to message that we anticipate as we're moving through these next couple of years, we'll see that construction piece of the pie get larger and some of the engineering and design get a little bit smaller. We've communicated this not just to the board and to elected leaders, but we've also communicated this to the construction industry and also the engineering and design industry as well. If you look forward to the next 2 years, FY 24 and 25, you see we're still above that $1 billion threshold. The amount of construction continues to go up by percentage from 81 to 83 to 85% across that area. So we're seeing a little bit less in engineering and design, a little bit more in construction. As you look in this table, in your larger breakout tables on tables 12 and 13 on pages 25 and 26, this is just kind of a roll-up of some of those. So at the top, you see GOMESA, the Gulf of Mexico Energy Security Act. We anticipate revenue projections of $128 million next year and expenditures in that same amount. I'll note that some of that 128 is a carryover from previous years. We do anticipate the GOMESA revenues that we'll receive this year will be down a little bit, and it's down a little bit because production was shut in a little bit during hurricane season last year. So we are anticipating that the increment that the state and the parishes will receive will be a little bit lower. Some of that is a carry forward from previous years, but we are requesting the approval to spend those funds in this particular year. If you group the NRDA, the Natural Resource Damage Assessment, the NIFWIF, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation Gulf Environmental Benefit Fund, and the Restore Act funds together, collectively, that's about $800 million. This is all part of the BP, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill settlements, and it's a large chunk of our funding. So of that $1.3 billion, almost $800 million are being realized as a result of that settlement. The CPRA line item there, that is just the federal funding amount. That's not the state piece, but it's about $91 million. Other funding in the amount of about $220 million, and I'll note that other funding, some of it comes from kind of smaller amounts of funding that we receive from BOEM or some interagency transfers that we realize in partnership with DNR on beneficial use or mitigation work. And then the last item in there is the state recurring non-surplus funds, $68.9 million. So as I mentioned before, about 92% of the funding will be project-associated expenditures across the coast. Engineering design of 33 projects, about $80 million, about 136,000 acres will be benefited by these projects. Planning in the amount of 5 projects, about $11 million. Construction will be moving 76 projects, about $1 billion in the next fiscal year, a little over 57,000 acres benefited, plus 109 miles of levee with work going on. And I'll note a lot of this work, the levee work in particular, it's work we're doing in collaboration with levee districts, North Lafourche, South Lafourche, Terrebonne levee and conservation districts, and levee districts across the coast. And then M&M, 161 projects have been completed to date. We anticipate those cost around $55 million. So I'll go ahead and start kind of the maps from Southwest. I'll go from left to right, west to east. Southwest region, we anticipate 8 active projects, 5 in construction, 3 in engineering and design. I'll just note a couple of those projects in construction. The South Grand Chenier Marsh Creation Project, that's a CPRA project that will be moving into construction. Our partners at NRCS will be the lead agency on that project. Project number 5 on this list, and I'll point this out just for its location, the Long Point Bayou Marsh Creation Project. I believe item 10 on the agenda is going to speak about this project a little bit more, so I won't steal the thunder other than to show the location. And then a few projects in engineering and design. I know Ms. Katie Freer from our office was at the Chenier Plain Authority meeting last night and gave an update on the Calcasieu-Sabine large-scale marsh and hydrologic restoration project. And I'll also note Southwest Coastal is in here under engineering and design. It should really be in both engineering and design and in construction. And with the news we heard today, that'll be hopefully expanding the scope of what we have in our project throughout Southwest Coastal area. These are a few projects that will show some highlights. I'll start with the center project, the Rabbit Island restoration. This was a NRDA TIG project that was completed last year. This project was literally built for the birds. It was to replace bird habitat that was impacted during the Deepwater Horizon event. The project, it was a challenge to get built. We had some weather events, some other challenges. The early nesting season out here also had some challenges with some heavy rain events that we experienced in southwest Louisiana. But when the birds started to nest, they really started to nest, and they exceeded our expectations tremendously. Much like the Queen Bess Island that was built a few years ago, this project we're very excited about the results, not only from a habitat standpoint, but also the birds that we built it for. They're performing the way that we hope they would. The Cameron Meadows Marsh Creation and Terracing project I showed in the implementation update, and then the Cameron Creole Freshwater Introduction project. I'll show a little bit of a video on this. This is another Cpri project. It was constructed by our good friends at NRCS. The marsh on the east side of the Calcasieu Lake has suffered land loss because of salinity issues. Rainfall has been the only true source of fresh water entering the marsh system. To alleviate that, we built a controlled gated structure to divert fresh water from the intercoastal waterway into the 22,500 acre marsh environment. Terraces in the outfall help to settle sediment. Total budget about $27 million. This project was completed in the last fiscal year. You can see a lot of terraces in this project area. The structure, there we go. There's the structure up along the intercoastal waterway that allows that fresh water to move into the system. We'll move just a little bit over to the east into the south central area. 39 active projects. There are 26 in construction, 11 in engineering and design, and 2 in planning. You can see on the map the projects that have the little gold box around them. Those are the projects that are in construction. So on this map, I'll just highlight a few projects over in Vermilion Parish. There's the North Vermilion Bay Shoreline Protection Project. This is a Restore Parish matching project. We anticipate that Parish will have this project out to bid later this spring. This is an expansion of a previous shoreline protection project in the Vermilion area. In Iberia Parish, the Rodeer Canal water control structure and the Jefferson Canal flap gate. Those are 35 and 18. Those are over in Iberia Parish. CPRA is providing funds to Iberia Parish to do the construction on those projects. And then one other project, the Sycamore Point State Park Improvements Project. There was a ribbon cutting on the first phase of this. This is a NERDA Rec Use project over in St. Mary Parish. There is continuing work going on that project as well. A number of projects in engineering and design that I'll highlight, and you'll note this map includes projects that are also part of the Atchafalaya Basin program. Next month in February, we will have a presentation on the Atchafalaya Basin plan. That plan gets folded into the CPRA annual plan, but we'll give that presentation fully next month. A couple of projects from that area that are in construction. In engineering and design, the Murphy Lake Depth Restoration Project. A couple of other projects I'll note over in Vermilion Parish, the East Rainy Marsh Creation Project, and then the feasibility study for the South Central Coastal area. A couple of projects that I'll highlight in this area, the Homa Navigation Canal Lock Complex, and I'll show a little bit of video and give some more detail on that later. The next project in the center, Trinity East Island. This island is one of the 3 components of the Terrebonne Barrier Island Restoration Project. That project was completed prior to hurricane season last year and performed relatively well. I know we've shown some video and had a site visit on that project with the media as well. And then the North Vermilion Bay Shoreline Protection Project. This is a previous increment of that project that I referenced earlier. The Homa Navigation Canal, you may recall the groundbreaking that some of you were in attendance of a few months ago. This project will be built alongside the Bubba Dove floodgates on the H&C below Homa. It's a huge project with a cost that exceeds $300 million, with almost all of it being paid for with Restore Bucket 3 funding. Phase 1 is in construction today. That's dredging to clear out about 1 million cubic yards for the lock channel. Dredge material is going to be used beneficially from that to create about 180 acres of marsh in 6 areas along the channel north of the complex. The H&C lock, once constructed, you can see the lock right there as we're flying over the designed area. It'll allow a longer window of opportunity for navigation activities when the floodgate is closed to protect communities from storm surge or high water event. During the gate closures, the lock will allow vessels to travel in either direction, enabling officials to close the floodgate earlier and keep it closed longer, benefiting the area's ecosystem, which has suffered from saltwater intrusion. And we'll go to the last region in the southeast. 67 active projects, 45 in construction, 19 in engineering and design, and 3 in planning. I'll highlight just a few projects on this map. Again, the areas in construction are the ones with the gold boxes around them. We anticipate later this year the LaBranch East and the LaBranch Central marsh creation projects will go out to advertisement. Our good friends at NRCS are working on that package. So as you're crossing over the Bonnie Carey Spillway, if you look to the lake or to the riverside and see some activities, that may be those projects that are in construction. Included on this map, New Orleans to Venice, 3 different areas. Chip mentioned a little bit earlier some of the funding that the state anticipates to realize from the federal government through some of the infrastructure areas. There are numerous marsh creation projects that I talked about earlier: the New Orleans Land Bridge, the Spanish Pass, the NOAA large-scale Barataria marsh creation, the Grand Chenier Ridge restoration, and the Lake Bourne marsh creation project that are included on this map. And I'll note also the project in Tangipahoa Parish, the Manchac Land Bridge. This is part of the Restore project parish matching program that's providing funding for that along the kind of edge of Lake Pontchartrain to the south and north. Projects in engineering and design, a number of CPRA projects that are in design in the Delacroix area, the East Delacroix, North Delacroix, Phoenix, and Reggio marsh creation projects. In St. Tammany, the Bayou Cane marsh creation projects, and then a project that was funded through the region-wide trustee implementation group. It's the first region-wide TIG project, is the Chandelier Island restoration. That's that dot out number 42, kind of the very tip of the boot in Louisiana. Let's see. This is, we thought this video was so great we would show it to you a second time of the Spanish Pass project. I'll go ahead and pass through that. And then again, the Golden Triangle project. I will not read you the details on either of those projects. I'll trust that you caught it in the implementation update. The timeline, so today is the 19th of January. We presented to this to the board. The public comment period officially opens today. It closes on February the 26th. We anticipate coming back to the board in March at our March 16th meeting to present our final plan, and then it will be submitted to the legislature a couple of weeks after that. We do have annual plan hearings that are coming up next week. January 24th will be over in Lake Charles at the Seed Center at McNeese. On the 25th, we'll be over at Nichols in Thibodaux. On the 26th, we'll be over in Metairie at the Joe Yenny building, and then we'll be doing a virtual meeting on Thursday, January the 27th at 6 p.m. That'll be a Zoom meeting. All of these meetings will start with an open house at 5:30. We'll have a public meeting and a presentation, much like the one I just gave, and then public comment to follow that presentation. For those, the Atchafalaya Basin Plan that I mentioned earlier, we'll be presenting that in detail. We'll also have a couple of public meetings that'll be coming up. Both of those will be virtual, January 25th from 2 to 4 in the afternoon, and then January 31st from 6 to 8 p.m. In the evening. And those details will be available on the CPRA website. This plan, as well as an interactive map, is now loaded on the CPRA website, so you can go to the dots on the interactive map and find out more information. If there have been articles written by the media on these projects, you should be able to access many of those, as well as other project details and the annual plan itself. Lastly, how to comment. There's a couple ways to comment. You can come to our meetings. You can attend those and comment in person. You can send us your comments through the mail at 150 Terrace Avenue, Baton Rouge, Louisiana 70802, or you can send them to us via email to coastal@la.gov. In your subject line, put FY, it should say 2023 annual plan instead of the 2021 annual plan. But if you send it to coastal@la.gov, our folks will probably figure it out. Again, the deadline to submit comments by is February 26th. That concludes my presentation, Mr. Chairman. I'm eager for any questions that the board may have.
All right, thank you. Mr. Grandy, any questions from Mr. Bourgeois?
Yeah, just the sheer numbers of projects in this is just kind of phenomenal. And I was just thinking about the fact that, you know, Chip, you read off this morning 1.964 billion in federal dollars coming in to this to add, and that's got to have some impacts on this because there's a lot of federal cost share is borne by the state and what have you. So my question is, you know, obviously it would have been good to get those numbers about 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, but what do you see that as being a challenge in tweaking the annual plan to consider this large additional chunk of cash?
Yeah, so I guess as I mentioned in my preface to the presentation, in some cases we've already included cost share for feasibility studies. They've been
feasibility.
It was challenging because we didn't know the quantity of funds that would be available on what particular project and whether or not it was going to be coming through at a cost share or full federal expense. So now that we know that, we can start to get a game plan together to how we deal with that. In the case of some of the costs on Morganza to the Gulf, I think we've already been planning for that and been planning for it for years. And some of the funding that we've done to date, some of the funding that I believe is part of the PPA that was signed yesterday will allow us to get cost share for some funds that we've already allocated and that we'll begin to move through engineering and design and construction on. So again, we'll sit down and like every other project, start to develop the game plan and go at it.
It just demonstrates the complexity of trying to get, you know, this to legislators as accurate as you can get it in the time frame.
Absolutely. Now, and I guess now the fun really starts.
Yes,
Dwayne, now you got to go build it. Allocating it's one thing, but getting it on the ground from a funding standpoint, from a permitting standpoint, from a land writing standpoint, that's when the fun starts.
We know that.
I think the three biggest, I don't want to call them challenges, but the three projects that really jump out to me as far as a cost share from the state or Morganza, Southwest Coastal, and then determining how the monies for Atchafalaya Basin are going to flow and who's going to be the non-federal sponsor on those projects. So as you know, for Morganza, which Mr. Grandy was just, there's a tremendous amount of work already on the ground, negotiating with the Corps for crediting. So we should, in my mind, be very close. We should have already met our cost share on that, but it's just negotiating that with the Corps. Southwest Coastal, $125 million. I know that you said we've got money in the annual plan for that, but I doubt it's 35% of the 125. So we need to really scrub those numbers. And then again on the Atchafalaya Basin, I think everything else from NOV, from West Shore, a good bit of the Atchafalaya money is emergency subs. So those are the three that are in IIJA that I think we need to really look at. And then Tangipahoa as well. I mean, we've got the cost share for that met as well. Senator Henskins is here and has a question. I didn't even see you come in, Senator.
I snuck in behind you, Chip. And listen, I've got a municipal police retirement board meeting to get to in a minute, but I just want to take this moment to thank everyone in the CPRA. Chip, I think 2 years ago when I became the chairman of Natural Resources, I asked you a very simple gate-on question. I said, where is the CPRA in its lifehood? Are we still children? Are we adolescents? Or are we adults? And you told me 2 years ago we're about to step into being adults. And I think today, with the news from this morning, the master plan that we're going to present this year to the legislature, I think we're walking into the adulthood. And I want to thank all of y'all for your work, from Garrett, don't tell Jerome, to you, and of course the 3 governors that participated in this too. It's an incredible force of nature out there. And you know, in Southwest Louisiana, we complain when we want to complain. We don't throw stones. Ms. Cormier's taught us to all throw rocks, and only rocks. But when we see the progress, we need to brag on it too. So I just want to give you all the kudos of the work y'all have done. I'm thinking the last 7 years, but it's been a lot longer than that. So I just want to thank all of y'all.
Thank you, Senator. Just Ms. Goodson just prompted me, and I think it's a good time to have this discussion. So as all of you know, over the last several years, the state has been running surpluses. And the governor has been very, very generous on allocating surplus dollars to the coastal program, facility planning, DOTD. And this year we were asked to put together a list of about $150 million worth of surplus projects. And that allocation, those dollars, have been very helpful in allowing us to meet cost share obligations, many of which are on West Shore, on Marpaw, all of those things. And so it's important to not just assume that Brent and I go to the table, or Ms. Goodson goes to the table, and that those dollars are going to be in the final budget that comes out of the legislature. It requires Bayou Lafourche and Port Fourchon and Shell and MRD. I'm looking around the room. Private industry to come up and help us lobby the legislature on getting those funds into the coastal program. And so once again, that's going to be an effort for us in the upcoming legislative session. So we're going to be spending a lot of time with legislators when they're here for the redistricting session. And hopefully that will help us once we get into the regular session. But when we're talking about, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars in federal funds, the state has got to meet our cost share obligations for those projects. So it would be great to have not only board members but members of the audience at the table and in committee with us. Ms. Cormier?
So, Mr. Grandy, I remember times when the pie charts that you showed had more blue than green, which is way more engineering and design. And so my question is this. In active projects for the fiscal year 2023, you have 76 in construction. Do you anticipate the number of projects we're going to be able to actually do? Like, in other words, is the agency prepared to do 120 construction projects a year? What's our number? What is this stretching your team at 76 construction projects to the max, or have we thought about that?
Well, and I'll note, so in that 76, there's some smaller projects, okay, and there's some bigger projects, okay, that are listed in there. Some of and it doesn't mean that small projects don't have big headaches.
Right.
So sometimes, you know, even the Rec Use project, even though it's maybe a boat launch or the one over in St. Mary Parish, there's still challenges, and we have accountability, and we have to go through the same processes that we do with those. I don't know that we have a number that there's a cap number that we have, and I'll say a lot of these projects, the funding flows through CPRA, but we partner with levy districts or parishes. So I don't think you just look at within the context of our employees, but it's the broader. It's the local folks who are doing work. It's other state agencies that we're partnering with on some projects, and then it's federal agencies. So I think it's a collective, and I think there's a critical mass of really great folks that are out there at the agencies, and then we've got consulting contractors that we work with, and construction contractors as well. Okay,
just
so
making sure.
I don't see capacity as a limiting factor.
Right. Okay, that's what I just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
All right. Any Mr. Hidalgo?
Try not to dance too much, but I like to make a comment that this is amazing and exciting, and a great presentation. Thank you.
We'll leave the dancing to Monica and Lori. Yeah. Thank you for not dancing, Bill. Appreciate that. It would be All right. Any questions, comments from state agencies? The top row here is on fire, which I always appreciate the active dialogue. Any other questions or comments for Mr. Grandy on the annual plan? All right. Well, again, I'll be looking for the opportunity to comment and the public meetings that we'll be doing across South Louisiana. As we're moving to the next agenda item, if you could help me, Ms. Goodson, on what that is. I've got my laptop all over my agenda. I'm continuing to do a dive into the Restore. So Ms. Barnes, I believe, is coming up. Yes. Chris, if you could come up. But I continue to just dive into the legislation. But there's also a lot of funding for things in the greater New Orleans area. I see we've got Mr. Calley here. There's about $94 million for SELA, which is a lot of drainage work. I know that it's not handled by SLEPFA West, but that $94 million is within the Algiers Subbasin, complete design for 3 features of the project, initiate construction. There's additional money, $4.75 for the Lake Pontchartrain and vicinity hurricane protection projects. So it continues to be far and wide, the investments that are coming out of Washington. So Ms. Barnes is going to give us an update on Restore. And this is a voting item, members. Correct, Chris?
Yes, it is. So apologies, our computer appears to be restarting for the presentation. Okay, we should be back up and running in just a minute. Yep, that's me. Okay, good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Today I will be talking about our Restore State Expenditure Plan Amendment Number 2. And as a quick reminder, this amendment is specific only to the state's Restore Act Spill Impact Component funds, also known as Bucket 3 funds, which will total approximately $551.5 million through 2031. So not all of those funds are in hand today, but will be paid out over time. As we discussed at the October CPRA board meeting, this amendment seeks to do 2 things. First, expand the geographic scope of the adaptive management program so certain activities can occur coast-wide rather than being geographically limited, and reallocate $60 million from the Parish Matching Program to the River Reintroduction into Maurepas Swamp project. And as you may recall, in February 2020, the Restore Council voted to budget $131 million from Bucket 2 of the Restore Act for construction of the Maurepas project under Funded Priorities List FPL, also known as FPL 3A. And because the estimated total implementation cost of the Maurepas project is approximately $190 million, the state of Louisiana confirmed in FPL 3A that it was planning to use approximately $60 million from another source and specifically identified the spill impact component allocation to cover that cost. So this amendment seeks to carry out that commitment to fully fund the Maurepas project. And all other projects and programs and corresponding details that were approved in the first amended Restore Plan and the Parish Matching Amendment, which was the first amendment to the plan and allocated $20 million to 6 parish priority projects, remain in full force and effect to the extent not modified by this SEP Amendment Number 2. So the draft amendment was published on CPRA's website for public comment for a minimum of 45 days. And in order to invite members of the public to comment, we did several things. We issued a press release on October 20th. We also placed ads in 21 newspapers across the coast, inviting members of the public to comment. And we sent letters to the 4 federally recognized tribes in Louisiana. Comments were accepted from October 20th through December 6th, and CPRA has considered all public input and has updated the amendment accordingly. CPRA received and considered 4 sets of comments from 4 distinct groups or organizations. And notably, the 4 sets of comments we received were representative of more than 20 organizations and affiliate organizations with thousands of members. And these comments were circulated to the board last week, so you should have those in your files. All comments were supportive of the amendment, and 2 comments expressed support for identifying and using other funding streams to support parish priority projects and augment parish investments in projects consistent with the state's coastal master plan. CPRA appreciates the comments expressing support for the parish priority projects and remains committed to supporting those projects consistent with the coastal master plan. In fact, CPRA has already submitted a request on the order of several $millions, subject to approval by the Louisiana legislature, to support parish projects, and will continue to look for and identify funding streams that align with those priorities. And because no comments requested revisions to the amendment, the revisions were limited to minor updates and clarifications, and formatting issues were identified and fixed. And this amendment, which updates the state expenditure plan, is subject to CPRA board approval. So we have a resolution for your consideration and vote today. And if approved, the amendment will be submitted to the Gulf Coast Ecosystem Restoration Council, also known as the Restore Council, for its acceptance as a prerequisite to CPRA's application for funding activities described in the amendment under the spill impact component. The Restore Council will then have 60 days to approve the amendment, and the state will be notified in writing once we can apply for grants to fund activities consistent with the amendment. And that is the end of my presentation, so I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have.
All right, thank you, Chris. Freaking mess up here. All right, any questions for Chris? If not, thank you, Barbara. Any questions? I don't see any questions. So, any public comment before we open the floor or ask for a motion on the amendment to the state expenditure plan for Clean Water Act funds? Restore. All right. We'll have a motion from a board member. A motion by Ms. Gorman, a second by Mr. Hidalgo to amend the state restore plan. Any public comment? Any objection to the motion? Motion approved. Thank you, Ms. Barnes. Agenda item number 10. We've got a Calcasieu River oil spill natural resource damage assessment settlement. I did not see you sitting back there, Caroline. Good morning.
Okay, where is the button for that? Okay, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, good morning, Chairman and members of the board. I just was going to give you a brief overview and an update on the natural resource damage assessment settlement for the 2006 oil spill in Calcasieu River. The trustee.
Caroline, can you come up to the mic a little bit more, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, this would help too. Morning. Sorry about that.
There you go.
The trustees involved in this particular settlement are the 5 state trustees, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with it. law school, the Louisiana Law Coordinator's Office, DNR, DQ, Wildlife and Fisheries, and of course CPRA as well. On the federal side, we had 2 federal agencies that were co-trustees for us on this particular settlement. NOAA is one of the federal agencies involved, and the other agency is the Fish and Wildlife Service. Just to give you a little bit of background on the spill itself, the spill occurred in June of 2006 and originated from the Citgo Lake Charles manufacturing complex, and occurred when 2 stormwater tanks overflowed because of a heavy rain incident. Over 54,000 barrels of waste oil were spilled, and also an extensive amount of wastewater. The areas impacted are kind of indicated in the map that's associated on the slide, but impacted Indian Marais, Calcasieu River, and a number of other waterways and marshes in that particular area. The trustees and Citgo worked on quantifying the injuries resulting from this spill, and really focused their quantification on 5 main categories, which are depicted here, but it's water column organisms, marsh habitat, shallow subtidal and intertidal habitat, birds, and recreational services. Eventually, all the parties, the trustees and Citgo, agreed to a settlement of $19.69 million to resolve the liability associated with the spill from OPA and the Oil Spill Prevention and Response Act, the state statute associated with NRDA. And a proposed consent decree was filed in federal court in June of 2021. Notices for the consent decree were posted in the federal and state register. The trustees and the court didn't receive any comments, so eventually the court approved the settlement in August of 2021. Subsequent to the consent decree being finalized, the trustees issued a damage assessment and restoration plan, which basically outlines the quantification of the injury and also what the trustees are proposing as restoration options to compensate for the injuries. A 30-day public review and comment period was also associated with the damage assessment and restoration plan. Notice was given for that in the Louisiana Register. Again, no comments were received, and the trustees are currently finalizing the damage assessment and restoration plan, which will be available like it is for the draft document on our website, which is depicted here.
Thank
you. The restoration projects included in the plan, so that the trustees have identified for implementation, are 3 main projects already identified, Long Point, marsh creation being one of them, which I will get into in a little bit more detail in just a second. There's also a Calcasieu Lake Oyster Culture Plan project, the HNC Bird project, and then there is a 4th category for recreational enhancements, where we have not selected a restoration project, but we are definitely soliciting restoration ideas for restoration. Again, I'll get into that in just a second. As was already announced, this is the Long Point Bayou Marsh Creation Project, which is in the annual plan this year. We are also really excited about this because this is a great example of a partnership between NRDA and CPRA. CPRA and EPA have designed the project. EPA is the federal sponsor for this project, and the Corps will be constructing it. As you, I'm sure, are all aware, it's about 400 acres of saline marsh and resources that are benefiting for this from the perspective of the NRD settlement are, various habitat and also birds, and the total project cost from the settlement provided is about $13.7 million. The second restoration project that I wanted to highlight, again, a great partnership, this time between NERDA funding and Wildlife and Fisheries Program, is the building of about 18 acres of Oyster Reef resources benefited on for this particular project is for the water column organisms, and out of the settlement, about 1.5 million was allocated for this particular category. And then the third project, which is the Houma Navigation Canal Bird Island project, is a partnership actually between two NERDA programs, so to speak, because it's a co-funding from the 2006 Calcasieu River Sitgrove settlement, and then also the Deepwater Horizon NERDA funding that's been ongoing now for some time. The intent here is for the Calcasieu River settlement to offset some of the cost or potentially add on to the HNC bird project that's already been selected for Deepwater Horizon funding. Obviously, this project will be compensating or benefiting birds, and out of the 2006 settlement spill, about 1.65 million is allocated for this particular project. And then, as I mentioned, there is a fourth category in here, which is the recreational use, which the trustees have not selected a project. Allocated out of a settlement for this category is about $740,000, which is going to have to be spent on recreational boating or resources that compensate for loss of recreational boating, shore fishing, and just general shoreline use. If there are any ideas for restoration projects, they can be submitted to our website. That's indicated here, but it's data.losco.org. There is a portal there to submit restoration projects for NRD cases. The trustees in the future will be providing a restoration plan for those projects once they have been selected. And in closing, just my contact information if there is any follow-up questions that anybody may have, and for any questions related to project submittals, this is the contact information for the person that's handling that, and also again the portal. And that concludes my presentation, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Caroline. We've got one question from Ms. Cormier.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your presentation.
Sure.
Can you, so my understanding is that this oil spill happened in southwest Louisiana, correct?
Correct.
I'm a little concerned, and I'm a big birder, so about the Houma Navigational Canal bird project using some of the funding from the oil spill that happened in the Cheniere Plain in southwest Louisiana. Is there no other bird project we could do in the Cheniere Plain that we could find since the oil spill happened in that area? It seems to me that would make sense that if it happened there, we're going to restore there. But just a question.
Yeah, no, and it's a good question. The trustees definitely always look for proximity as well to the source of the spill as a priority. I think at this point there were no restoration projects available that would compensate for those resources. And I do think that birds especially are a little bit more not as site specifically tied, so we do go to restoration to for species that fly and that are not necessarily just tied to Southwest Louisiana. So it was just the best option at the time.
Right. And well, I just encourage you in the future when there are oil spills in areas that the restoration needs to be in the area where the oil spill occurred. And also, there is Rabbit Island that they've just redone here in CPRA. One of the components that was a CPRA project way back in the day for Calcasieu Parish was a bird viewing platform on Rabbit Island, so people could drive their boats up and go stand and look at. So in the future, if you need some suggestions about where to spend that, we can probably help you with that. But that could be an additional resources adding to the Rabbit Island project in some kind of aspect. That is in the Cheniere Plain, and that would be acceptable for Calcasieu Parish citizens as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Or like she said, Miss Gorman said, maybe part of the recreational that you're looking for could be concentrated in the southwest in the Cheniere Plain.
Yes. Great.
All right, good comments. Ms. Cormier, any other questions for Caroline? This is just a briefing, right, Caroline? No action is needed from the board. All right. Well,
Okay,
thank you very much, Caroline, for your presentation. And Ms. Cormier, we will keep that in mind for future settlement discussions. And the Rabbit Island, of course, came to mind when you asked your question. Let's see here. Next up, moving right along, got two more to go. Coast Vegetative Planning Program. We've got Jeremy Rodriguez with LDAF. If you could come forward, please. Dr. Twilley here? There he is. Okay. And then I've got one public comment card from Captain Ricks. If you'd like to make a public comment, please get a public comment card at the table outside of the doors. Mr. Rodriguez, go ahead.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Jeremy Rodriguez. I work for the Louisiana Department of Agriculture and Forestry within the Office of Soil and Water Conservation, and I'm the project manager for the Coastal Vegetative Planting Program. In the interest of time, I'm going to be pretty brief, so if you have any questions, please just jot them down and I'll get you at the end. All right, so jumping right into it, directly from our program abstract, what is this program? Reestablishment of native wetland vegetation to help stabilize, protect, and enhance areas of critically eroding coastal wetlands or newly created coastal wetland areas are often used singularly as a restoration project or as a vegetative component of larger scale projects. So we go out and we plant lots of marsh grasses. We can do that as an individual project, or we can do that as part of another project. So, for instance, someone has some terraces they need vegetated, we can go out and we can deliver some plants for that. The overall objectives of the program, pretty straightforward. Reduce soil erosion, improve wildlife habitat, and improve water quality. So these vegetative plantings, we use those to recreate natural features lost to erosion, stabilize existing habitat, and that's going to reduce turbidity, reduce nutrients, and that's going to help us in turn to do our part to reduce hypoxia. And we've done a lot of it. So we've put about 1.5 million plants in the ground since the program began in 1988. And this is pretty impressive given the fact that most of our projects range about 2,000 to 4,000 plants in size. So it took us quite a bit of time and project locations to get to this number. And so for each one of these little green dots, we go through this process. So we will go out and we will identify a site. So these sites are sometimes brought to us directly from local landowners. These might have been a site that we saw while we were out, scoping out another site, or partners might bring us these sites, and we'll go out and we'll take a look. So we'll measure water depth, take salinity readings, probably grab a handful of mud to see what it's like out there. And we'll usually sketch up a quick little map of our area of interest, and then we head back to the office and do a little bit further evaluation. So we'll check the area for our area here in Lake Leary. This area looks like a pretty high rate of land loss, and so that's going to bump the priority up a little bit, so a good spot to put plants. We'll check our water levels and salinity levels in the area over time to see which vegetation will work best there. We'll also check the soil type to see which vegetation would work best there given the water and salinity levels over time. And we'll put all that information together into this evaluation sheet, which basically tells us, is this a good area to plant or not? We'll see if these projects, the project needs fit into our budget, and we'll take a look at logistics. So how far is this from the nearest boat launch? Is our current equipment able to complete this task? So we currently operate out of a 19-foot flatboat. We have a very small program, and so do we have to cross large bodies of water? If we're going to have volunteers, do we need to call in reinforcements or one of our partners to get bigger boats, things like that. We'll also check the water levels, and so when we did the site assessment, was it a little bit deeper? Could we get there with an outboard, or do we now need to call in, maybe Wildlife and Fisheries or someone else and see if we can get an airboat or a gator tail to get out there? And if we are going to use maybe some volunteers to give us a hand planting these projects, how many do we have available? Is the group large enough and to work with our equipment to be able to get out to the site, or are they too large and we have to move them to a different project site? So we take all of that into consideration. After all of that is done, we will submit that as a proposal to Shane Fawcett CPRA, and once it is approved, we will start working on our permissions and permitting. Sometimes we'll have to do a GPU, a grant of particular use. We also use these cooperator agreements through our local soil and water conservation districts, which I'll explain more about in just a little while. This is kind of a streamlined permissions process. And occasionally we will use just a regular old email if we have a landowner who's not ready to work on a cooperator agreement just yet. So after all of that, we'll send out bids. Once we get the bids back, the winning bidder will deliver our plants and we will install the project. So these are some bulrush we had delivered. We'll get myself out in the marsh. My partner is there in the red shirt with a few volunteers to help us plant some of these islands. This is out in Delacroix. And then after we're all done, we will have a nice finished project here, which will hopefully vegetate. This project was on Marsh Island. That is a terrace that's created from a navigation channel they dug, and we vegetated that for them. So once all of that's done, we will go out and we'll monitor our projects. So that's myself and Mr. Joey Bro here, taking a look near West Bell Pass. We'll walk each of the projects and check out, a few different things that I'll discuss in a moment, a few different observations we'll make and measurements. We'll write all that down, and then we'll take pictures of each segment. And so this is one of the photos, again, from West Bell Pass. And so this is the page that I was actually writing stuff down on that last photo. We'll check things, so how many plants survived, what was the plant productivity in the area, how many stems and shoots, lateral spread, was there any damage on the project. So we take all of that information, we write it down per segment, and then we'll use all that information and GPS points we took while we were out at the site to sketch up a map. And so these segment numbers line up with GPS points that line up with the original monitoring data, and all of those segment numbers and line up with these photos here. And so you get going between these three items, you'll be able to really get a good idea of what each project, how it performed, what it looked like, and maybe obstacles we ran into. And so after doing all those three, we put a nice little write-up together with observations we made that might not be reflected in the monitoring data. And this is just a program timeline of kind of how things flow throughout the program throughout the year, and I will skip that for now to save some time. And again, if anyone has any questions about this, we can come back to it. Quickly, we'll do a few project highlights to give you guys a really good idea of what exactly we do. West Bell Pass in 2018, just west of Port Fourchon. So we went out and we did planting. Here is a little over 4,000 plants, or excuse me, right at 4,000 plants. We tried some cluster plantings of seashore paspalum and saltgrass, and we did some smooth cord in the Back Bay area. So this is at the time of planting. The tide had just gone out. We were about 6 inches deep when we were planted. That's Port Fourchon in the background. This is a few months later at our initially monitoring. And this is at the 1 year mark. And so we're getting pretty good growth and response on the smooth cord that was planted in the Back Bay, despite having 2 storms that came through excuse me, between the time we installed the project and when it was monitored last. These are the cluster plantings I mentioned earlier. The cluster plantings is kind of a new thing we wanted to try. Basically, you start in the middle, spiral outwards on a 5-foot spacing, so no plant is closer than 5 foot to each other, and we felt like that worked pretty well. So this is at the time of planting. This is a few months later at our initial monitoring, and again at the 1 year mark. And so you can see we're getting pretty good results here, despite having almost a direct hit, I believe, by a tropical storm between the first monitoring and the year later. This was the Fore-Dune area that we planted. This was actually at the initial monitoring. I don't have one at a photo of the actual planting day, but this was the Fore-Dune originally. Let's see, I don't know if they have a pointer. Can y'all see that? Yeah, that area right there. That was the Gulf when we were planting. So all this material came in afterwards, and so at the year mark, you can see that the project's doing really, really well, and we're starting to get a little dune formational elevation right here. And so all this is filled in nicely, and so the project's doing exactly as we intended. This is Reggio, just southeast of New Orleans, my hometown, and just north of Delacroix. And so we had a lot of problems with Reggio establishing any vegetation out there. We tried bulrush, patens, rosocane. I think we even tried smooth cord at one time. And so we decided to try some cutgrass out here because it's a very fluid organic area. We did a little research and found that cutgrass might work well. And so we were really happy to find at our initial monitoring that we did have success. Pretty much every other project we did out here was a total loss almost at initial monitoring. But we were able to find out that cut grass works well. So this was our initial monitoring. And at the 1 year mark, we have nice mature stands of cut grass in this area that's holding up really well to the hyacinth, as you can see. I've actually visited this area since Hurricane Ida, and these stands are still there. So they were able to withstand hurricane force winds and wave energy and things like that. So that was really great. Holly Beach, we planted 4,100 bitter panicum in 4-inch pots. We had some, this is a few of our volunteers helping out. That was the day of planting. This is a few months later. A few months later, and then this is the 1 year monitoring. This project kind of aimed to capitalize off of a recent sand replenishment project. And last but not least, Bayou Hebert and Vermilion Parish is just south of Delcombe and right off the Intracoastal Canal. A landowner brought this to our attention, and we went out and we checked this area. He was saying that this little mud flat was starting to kind of open up a little bit, and so we went out and we did a site assessment, and we found that it was a good spot for planting, and we put some bulrush out here. This is us at the day of on the day of planting. You can see our trails there maneuvering out through the mud. This is a few months later at the initial monitoring and at the 1 year mark. So the site was almost unrecognizable when we went back at the 1 year mark because it's to look totally different than when we planted it. So really great success there. Okay, so now you should have a pretty good idea of what we do out there. You should have a really good image of what we do as far as these projects. And so what sets us apart from everybody else who plants grass? Because everybody and their brother does that, right? So we have what's called soil and water conservation districts who sponsor our projects. We have 11 participating SWCDs within the coastal zone. And I'm going to slide this in just to kind of show you. On the Deltaic Plain, we have the Boca Chica, Capitol, Lower Delta, New River, Crescent, Plaquemines, and Lafourche Terrebonne soil and water conservation districts. And on the Chenier Plain, we have the Gulf Coast, Vermilion, Iberia, and St. Mary districts. Each one of these districts is made up of a 5-member board. These are local landowners, and most of these guys have grown up their entire lives in these areas. So they have really awesome input on the local resource concerns of each one of these districts. And so they're able to provide that information to us to help us make really good selections for these projects. We also operate on a $400,000 annual budget, so a very small program. We average about 40 linear miles of plantings per year. And again, very small, 4 employees only. We have 2 project managers, one of those being myself, and 2 SWCD technicians. And we have our program oversight committee, which kind of oversees the program as a whole. This is chaired by CPRA. Also in the partnership is NRCS, Office of Soil and Water, and the Soil and Water Conservation Districts, which I mentioned already. These POC meetings are held quarterly or as decided by CPRA, and there's usually one of the 4 meetings a year, usually in May, is when we turn in all of the deliverables, all of our contract information, all of that monitoring stuff that I showed y'all earlier, proposals, photographs of all of the segments, all of that gets turned in at one of the POC meetings. And so each one of the partnership that I just mentioned, everyone has a particular role. And so CPRA provides the funds, general guidance, also the help with permitting. NRCS provides boats, technical assistance, personnel, office space, laptops, all kinds of stuff. Soil scientists to come out and help us check out sites and make sure that they're a good area to plant. Ag and Forestry, which is myself, Mr. Joey Bro. We were the administrators of the program and make sure that everything runs smoothly. And the local SWCDs, I kind of already mentioned, they sponsor these projects and bring us a lot of individual landowners to help us, make good decisions on where plants are needed most. And so what are some of the advantages of this program? So our program is a little particular, and we can kind of do things a little bit differently than most other programs. So we can work cooperatively or independently. So we can combine efforts with state, federal, or nonprofits, which we do regularly. We can work directly with a landowner, and so these come through our soil and water conservation districts, like I mentioned earlier, or we can choose independent projects. So there's been a handful of times I've been assisting another agency or department or whatever, and I just kind of happened to notice an area, I should check that out on the map when I get back to the office, and it turns out to be a great site to plant some grasses, and so we'll go back and we can do an independent project. Usually these are on private, but occasionally on public land, and as we all know, most of the marsh down here is privately owned. These SWCD cooperator agreements streamline the permissions process. And so I've had permissions, I found a site, had permissions within about a day in some cases. So we can really quick on how fast we can get permissions to go out and plant these projects. Another big one, we can alter on-site as necessary or move project sites entirely. So obviously this is with partnership approval. This is helpful in time-sensitive situations. So, for example, an intracoastal we're planning on doing last year, one of the islands got really damaged in Ida, and so we're planning on moving a project from the intracoastal about 1,000 feet north into the southern part of Lake Salvador to protect some of these islands that are starting to break up. And so if we can plan it quickly, we should be able to salvage what's there before it washes away. And once that washes away, it would have completely exposed our project area anyway to the full force of fetch from Lake Salvador. And also, we're able to assist a diversity of landowners. So not all landowners, obviously, are going to qualify for CPRA type projects, and a lot of them don't qualify for Farm Bill conservation programs. And so we're able to kind of fit in between those two and get conservation where it's needed. And three of the probably the most important advantages. This program is a proving ground, so it's been that for early large-scale CPRA projects. We're able to test and try new methods on a small scale. We can test plots in questionable sites. So for Reggio, for instance, we were able to try multiple smaller projects until we found something that fits, and now we can scale that up. Or we can submit it for, say, an LA 39 or something like that to get a lot of plants in these areas that maybe everyone was a little leery about to begin with. And one that I like a lot, program is not solely defined by success or failure. So we're shooting for the stars every time we go out there. I mean, we all are. We're all on the same page. We want great conservation. However, we have the freedom in our program to push the envelope a little bit and see how far we can go to see if we can make progress and change the way we've done things historically and make leaps and bounds and steps to make our planting techniques better. Another great advantage, we're going to generate a lot of in-kind contributions from our program. So we get about $100,000 worth of value of in-kind contribution from NRCS. And again, that was the boat, trucks, office space, laptops, all of that stuff. And we get an additional $40,000 contribution, value contribution from volunteer hours. And probably the best one, we're extremely affordable. We average about $1.89 per linear foot. And that's one of the most cost-effective programs in existence, if not the most cost-effective. And we do that through the use of volunteers. And so we have lots of volunteers that come through. You can see myself in the bottom picture there. Out with this gentleman is from Canada, and so we have volunteers that come from all over the U.S. We're able to bend their ears, so to speak, and tell them about what's going on in our neck of the woods down here and why it's important to us. But not only why is it important to us, so why is the coast important to everyone throughout the U.S. So we get to talk to about 200 or 300 volunteers a year that from all over the U.S. and again from Canada. We've had people from France and Italy and a few other places as well. So here's just a few more shots of some volunteers. And in closing, I'd just like to say that the program as a whole is a collective effort of years of hard work and knowledge gained that refines our work as the program matures. So with every success and every failure, we're able to refine our abilities, refine our knowledge, and do better conservation work, not only for the coast, but we're also able to share that with other individuals and help them do better conservation as well. So if you guys or anyone else have small project ideas, demos, whatever, please contact me and I will be able to go out and we can see if we can make something work. And with that, I'll take any questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. Great program. I just think it goes to show how the efforts of one state agency can help inform the efforts of another state agency. So some of the things that we're doing from a CRIMS and monitoring standpoint and adaptive management approach that we do across coastal Louisiana can obviously inform some of the efforts that you're doing at Ag and Forestry and vice versa. So I appreciate the update. Do we have any questions? Look like Ms. Gorman has a question, followed by Mr. Bourgeois.
So a great presentation, and I rarely get out of the office these days, as I'm sure a lot of us don't. But I did the other day, and usually the only grass I'm really concerned with is mainland river levee or my protection levees, etc. That kind of turf. But I happened to run across a farmer who asked me about vetiver grass, and was, I mean, he had tons of information on it. I actually went back to the office and looked into it. I mean, it grows up to 5 feet. Its root system is anywhere from, I think, 12 to 20 feet into the ground. Great for soil stability, etc. Do we use that in this, or is there a reason we don't? Or
no, I'm not too familiar with that particular grass. We're looking into certain other ones like Jamaican sawgrass, for instance. We're working with the Plant Materials Center down in Galliano, NRCS Plant Materials Center, to develop some, well, not develop, but maybe potentially use some new species that haven't historically been used for restoration purposes. But no, not that particular one. But that would be interesting. I'll get some information after the meeting from you about it.
Well, I appreciate your number, because I will call you, because I'd love to see how that would interact with other areas for erosion.
Yeah, sure. Definitely.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Mr. Bourgeois, followed by Mr. Bro.
Okay. Yeah, it's been about an hour yesterday driving back from New Orleans with Mr. Tim Allen of Apache, and Tim was noticed that this item was on the agenda, and he wanted to kind of compliment the program and basically say that, you know, one of the things that from their point of view that's the most thing is the proving ground points of it, right? He saw a case where, you know, on property they own, they maybe want or maybe should or shouldn't invest in something, and you guys get out there and prove it and prove that it works, and then that creates a good bit of opportunity for private companies to expend their own funds towards making improvements based on the gains that you have. And he said that was a particularly important part of the program, that it was exceptionally well run outside of that, and was very important to the land managers. And so he encouraged me to mention to you, Chip, and the powers that be, to do anything they can to sustain this program and even improve the funding for it so that it can do more good. So I'm passing that message along. But excellent presentation, and I can think of opportunities where we'll be in touch.
Thank
you. Thank you, Dwayne. Mr. Bro.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would just like to publicly commend Jeremy for the hard work that he does. He explained it pretty quickly, but what he does is not easy. There's a lot of juggling that goes on there, a lot of conservation districts, a lot of board members, a lot of personalities, and a lot of landowners. So it gets done really well. It's highly effective. Like he said, it's very, the benefit-cost ratio is just unequaled. But I'd like to go all the way back near to the origins of the program, and SCS, the precursor to the NRCS as we know it now. Horace Austin was the state conservationist then, and worked with LL&E to establish the Plant Materials Center down in Galliano. I think the original cost was like $1 an acre for that lease. And thus we had the PMC and Mr. Gary Fine, who did a lot, working with Jack Cutshaw with the Soil Conservation Service to determine early on what should get planted where. And from that, Mike Matern, who was hired on as the SCS's plant materials specialist, who did tremendous amount of work. The field farms that Jeremy showed you earlier, Mike Matern, Jack Cutshaw, and Gary Fine developed those farms, at least the origins of them, back then, late 80s, early 90s. And a lot of great work has been done since then. And on the DNR side, this program originated in the DNR Coastal Restoration Division, and Bill Good was very instrumental in helping to get this off the ground and contacting the right people to make it happen. And Kenneth Ballinger was right there with him. And over the years, Greg Grandy and Keith Lovell were also involved with the program. A lot of great work, a lot of good history, and like Jeremy said, a lot of people do marsh plantings and revegetation. They learned what they're doing from this program. It's been a great thing, and still evolving, and one day we might actually have a queryable database of all the monitoring data that Jeremy and his predecessors are putting together. It's like nothing you've ever seen, and it's a lot of input, and it's something that we work on whenever we can, but it's going to be very useful when we get there. Thank you.
Thank you. Good comments. All right. Anything else for Mr. Rodriguez? All right. Thank you, sir, for being here.
Thank you.
All right. Dr. Twilley to give us an update on a site development update for the Louisiana National Estuarian Research Reserve, more commonly referred to as the NER. Important issue that has been ongoing for the last several months. And as Dr. Twilley is coming up, I just remind everybody of Ms. Morgan Crutcher's involvement in this program.
That's correct.
who sadly passed away last year.
That's correct.
Dr. Twilley, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here to describe the continuation of the program. I have two objectives. One is I just want to make sure I leave with you the contact information so that you can follow up and with the program through our website and the information, because what I'm going to give you is just a real quick overview of where we are. And then second is the announcement of our town hall meeting. So let me go through this real quick. Just to reiterate the NEAR, National Estuarine Research Reserve, it's a federal state partnership. This is with NOAA. They have 29 NEAR sites around the country in the coastal states. We're one of the few that do not have a NEAR, so this is, and it's something that we've very excited about, because while we have other programs, federal and state partnership programs, such as Sea Grant and BITNEP, which is with EPA, Sea Grant is with NOAA, this one involves a place. This involves a site where we can actually build facilities, and one of the real key missions of the NEAR sites around the country is education and outreach, getting school kids out to see the sites, see what a delta is, and build that public education and outreach, which is so important to our program. And so we are in the initial steps. This is just to show you that we're in what we call the site nomination. Once a site is nominated and approved by NOAA, then we initiate what we call the designation process, which is going through an EIS. You have to go through the management plan. It's a very elaborate process following. So what we're discussing here and decision that we will be making over the next several months is where should the site be, so that we can move forward with the designation process. Here is where you can find the information of where we are in the stage of all of this. It's hosted by Sea Grant. If you go to the Sea Grant website, www.lacgrant.org, right to the left of the Sea Grant logo at the top of that website is the LNIR. We call it the Louisiana National Estuarine Research Reserve for short. We call it the LNIR program, and so this is where you can find out. There's a button on the lower right there that has all of our updates, and so it has a summary of all the meetings, of everything that we do. We publicly upload to this website to keep people informed. We are in the process of considering 3 alternative sites. That's the key place that we are right now. And again, that is for us, among those 3 sites, to nominate one that then is submitted by the governor to NOAA for approval. And once NOAA approves that site, then we again go through the process of having it designated. Those 3 sites, regions, really not down at the level of specific sites yet, but we're working in the Atchafalaya Basin, we're working in Barataria Basin, and in the Pontchartrain Basin. Those are the 3 basins where we're looking at opportunities of putting together state lands and state waters that would constitute a place where we could build a National Estuarine Research Reserve. Why state lands and state waters? It's a state-federal agreement. So that's a really key part, is that the management of the lands and the management of the waters and the state laws that are used and policies to manage that land, that is what we will use to constitute the management plan that we will send to NOAA. We're not going to add anything new. NOAA doesn't add things new. It's using what we have existing. So now that we have these 3 alternative sites, the stage we're at is going to the public, having public discussions of these sites, thus our town hall meetings. We had these lined up for September. Hurricane Ida changed that schedule, so we regrouped in November. We reorganized these in February. And so you'll see the plans in each of the basins. There are 3 town hall meetings in each basin. Some of the town hall meetings are virtual only. Some of the other meetings are will have a virtual access, but it's also an in-person meeting. And again, the location of those in-person meetings and the dates and times are listed. And we started broadcasting this, and this announcement today is to further that broadcast. And we'll be sending out information that has both a 2-page or little fact sheet to describe the NEAR process to the public, and also this information on the location and time of these town hall meetings. So again, this is how you can reach us. Feel free to send me an email note or contact, or use our deltanear@lsu.edu as our email address. And if you have any interest in helping promote any of this information to your constituents, please make sure we get you the information so you can distribute it as well, so we can get as much public engagement as we can. And Mr. Chair, that's all I have.
All right, thank you, Dr. Twilley. A very important initiative for the state. And we've got a comment or question from Mr. Bourgeois.
Yeah, Doc, thanks. A good presentation. You know, I was reading through the stuff last night. One of the frequently asked questions that just jumped out to me is, does this reserve designation bring any new regulations and permitting requirements on it? And that's a particular concern. You know, not that I'm trying to discourage this. The Three Basins Gen is great. We want this, what have you. But is there any way we can get some sort of declaration of that in the process of this? Because I hardly ever see things go the other way once you know, it starts to get a little hook in it from the federal side. So that's just my question for you.
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's one, and actually we are prepared, and rightfully so. That's probably going to be our #1 question out in the public, you know, meetings that we're getting ready to have. 2 comments. One is that when the designation process, you sign a memorandum of understanding relative to what role NOAA has in the management of the process. And actually, NOAA's responsibilities is to manage the system. In other words, they try to build a federal sort of perspective of what the system is trying to achieve from the federal dollars that are spent. That's their responsibilities. The states manage the site. So the state takes care of the day-to-day operations. And in that management plan MOU, again, that management is based upon what the state sends to NOAA, saying, this is how we're going to manage the site. Do you approve this as a NEAR? So it's really is what we send that is an agreement. Of course, you're right. Once, you know, tentacles get in, then are there any changes? And my address to that question that you asked is looking at the 29 other sites. You know, have there been other issues? I think Apalachicola Bay is a perfect example of where, you know, they've had some really tough you know, issues with their oyster and freshwater that comes down from Atlanta and all of that. And, you know, the NEAR has been, I think, a very good partner with the state and the oyster industry to sort of understand how the system works, how important certain salinities are, the monitoring program that's done. And so I think, you know, there are really good examples in the Gulf. Grand Bay has done the same for the state. It's been value added. I think, you know, I think what's important is ask the question, of the 29 sites, where are the sites where the kinds of, you know, controversies that could potentially occur? What are they? Where have they been? And why did it happen? And to be honest, I don't think anybody who's familiar with the NEAR program knows where any of those have been a problem. Texas is a really good example. They had to work with navigation, oil and gas, and so their MOU with NOAA was a very complicated one. And I think Texas really demonstrated to us that, you know, we can do this. And even though we have a very complicated policy and management process for our coast, very unique, this is doable. And so I think the examples demonstrate that I don't think, you know, it's realistic to ask the question, but I don't know if anyone can actually demonstrate examples at the other NERs where this has happened.
And I would just encourage, and in our MOU, we probably try to make that as strong as possible because it's not NOAA that I'm concerned about. It's some other folks that spread their tentacles in a way that's counterproductive to South Louisiana.
I hear you.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bourgeois. Any other questions for Dr. Twilley? All right. Thank you, sir, for being here. All right, I've got one public comment card from Captain Ricks. If anybody else wants to make a comment, please fill out a comment card. Captain Ricks, I'm going to allow your public comment, but in the future, I'd ask that you keep your public comments tailored to specific agenda items on the meeting agenda. But you want to discuss mitigation, but I will allow it and ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes.
Yes, sir. I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. Actually, that's part of my comment, but originally, by the way, I'm Captain George Ricks, President of State Louisiana Coalition. I'm giving comments on behalf of my membership of hundreds of fishing community members that I represent. No, actually, Mr. Klein, I wanted to publicly thank you, CPRA, and commend you on the Lake Bourne marsh creation project in St. Bernard Parish. As you said, it's 2,770 acres, the largest marsh creation project to date in the state's history, and we're very proud to have that in St. Bernard. And I think at a construction budget of $61 million, it says on your site. So there is great things y'all can do. As I told Bren previously at a meeting, if it wouldn't be for 2 projects in the master plan, y'all would be my heroes. But I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that 2,770 acres at $61 million, which would probably be built in 3 years, represents 20% of what you're planning on building with the Mid-Barrier Tarry Diversion in 50 years at a cost of 4% of what the diversion costs. And $305 million in mitigation costs, so we could build 5 of these projects at $61 million for what it's costing to mitigate alone for the Mid-Barrier Tarry Diversion. And while we're talking about mitigation, I'll be brief. I don't know how many of you saw the mitigation plans for the communities, specific communities affected by the Mid-Barrier Tarry Diversion. There's 5 communities that are listed on the site, and I'll just be brief and read part of it. Acquire permanent servitude on impacted parcels for increased water level excuse me, impacts, and pay property owners compensation for projects. Anticipated implementation at 30% of fair market value. Raise access roads, impacted homes to mitigate for increased water levels and impacted parcels. Build boardwalks between residences and the points of access to support connectivity and continued access between neighbors and community. But one in particular, fund floating garden boxes for each home to grow food or other plants in close proximity to homes. Seriously? I mean, these are fishing communities. These are fishermen. They're not farmers. And what happens to these boardwalks and garden boxes the first storm? This is how we're going to mitigate for communities? I mean, according to the environmental impact statement, you're going to cause permanent economic damage to low-income families. Raise water levels on communities that are already affected by high water. And you're going to give them garden boxes and boardwalks? I'm sorry. I've been in this fight for 10 years, and at what point do we say the diversion concept is too expensive, we're going to give up more than what we're going to get? And like I said 10 years ago, what good is the medicine if it kills the patient? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ricks. We'll just point you to the comments that we have received from the public on mitigation strategies. And we will not reach a point where we walk away from the concept of sediment diversions. Any other public comments? All right, do I have a motion to adjourn? I got a motion by Ms. Gorman, a second by Ms. Cormier. We are adjourned. Thank you.